All right, what's up and welcome back. I have changed the position of my mic. I plan on changing my mic entirely, just not right now or really not anytime soon. I changed the position of my mic because my last video, I think my voice came out a little odd. I think it came out a little weird. I'm not too sure. I didn't really like fact check it or read over everything, like listen over to everything. I just kind of assumed everything was coming out peachy. I am trying some different things on my computer, so I do apologize if my mic does sound a little bit different or if it does sound a little bit weird. This is basically going. Oh, for the people who might ask, maybe asking, maybe wondering, the video in the background is Grand Chase Classic. It was in the background of my other video, my last video as well. All it is well, I mean, it's Grand Chase Classic. It's the computer version of Grand Chase Mobile. For those of you who've seen Grand Chase first through a mobile aspect, for those of you who've played Kurt Spell and/or El Sword, you should know that Grand Chase, I believe, was the first one to come out. Then El Sword, then Kurt Spell. I played them all. I might have even made a few videos with each of them in recordings. Everything except for Grand Chase Mobile, of course. But this is Grand Chase Classic, like an up to date version of like the OG Grand Chase. It's on Steam, it's on Epic, and I've been playing with a Sin in this video as well as the last video. And for those of you wondering, I very much so did get him to 85. Woohoo! That took a long time. I'm not even gonna lie. I took a few breaks. I also had other responsibilities like work and class and just life. So naturally, yeah, it's not like I was just gonna breeze through it all like it was easy. And I play by myself because I don't really have anybody to play with me. Um, a lot of the people that I run into are in the Asian server, so I'm scared that they're going to cut away like the North America and South American servers solely for the Asian servers because for some weird reason everybody's hanging out in the Asian servers. Also, the gameplay that I have is recordings, all right? Like, well, of course. Oh, why wouldn't they be? These are recordings of the game that I was using with my main program. One of my friends introduced me to another program, and because of that, in my opinion, my recordings have been coming out a lot more clear, a lot more cleaner, a lot more clean, and I do plan on using all of that footage in time. But I do want to get rid of a lot of the footage that I have thus far. So I believe there should be some recordings of Roblox outside of Grand Chase, and then maybe a few recordings of a few other games. I'm not too entirely sure, just because I don't remember what all I was playing before I found this new like recording software. So yeah, that's just to answer those questions. If they come up, I'm sure nobody really cares, but just in case you do, there you go. I wanted to speak on the part two to the last story that I posted, which was revolving around my coworker at my most recent job. And what basically happens is, to continue off from there, I don't remember the exact like ending point, but basically I basically have bad blood with this coworker, like from that point onward, right? And it's not like I'm cussing this coworker out or I'm ignoring this coworker or whatever the case may be. It's just that this coworker doesn't want to talk to me. She doesn't want to have anything to do with me. She's distancing herself from me. So she and I are just not communicating. And I mean, in our job, you don't really need a bunch of communication to get things done, but every now and then you do. And even though I kept it going with like speaking with her, she would still be pretty dry and kind of distant when it came to communicating for job's sake. But at the end of the day, the job got done, so I don't care. Right? So you're probably like, well, where do you go from here? Well, now we move on to another coworker. So there's I have probably like 9 coworkers in total, maybe, and I don't have an issue with most to any of them, but there are technically 3 or so that I've hit a point of no return with. The first one I told you about, the 35-year-old, probably 36, if not 37 by now. Um, I said in the last video. Okay, that stuff happened with her. It's whatever. All right. Well, now I've got another coworker who is also a black female who's about 34, 35, I believe. You're probably like, why are there so many females at your job? Believe it or not, they are like the only two. For some reason, my manager would only hire maybe 2 to 3 females at a time. Other than that, everything else is just straight men. And there's nothing wrong with having like a bunch of guys in a job where anybody can work the shift. I guess it's just more so you get put where or at whatever is convenient for you. I do have some stories about some female coworkers who worked where I'm at and quit like within a week's time, days time, and a few other stories and around all that. But I don't know how soon that'll be. If I remember, or if anybody comments on it, I might end up making a video about it sometime in a more recent fashion. But the next coworker, this coworker is a okay. So I was actually getting her confused with another one, but I'll do this one first. So like I said, black. This one's also in her 30s or so. This one has kids. Um, she and I talked a lot more than the other coworker did. Which a little fun fact about people in a personal communication: when you self-disclose, you put yourself open at risk. Which is why, especially post-COVID, so many people are a little more hesitant to talk about what's personal to them or talk about their actual um, personal lives and things that matter because they're scared that it's going to be used against them. And when it's being introduced or spoken about with a complete stranger, I guess you should definitely be a little bit more cautious about what you say because you don't know this person's full intentions, even though they seem happy or okay or whatever with what it is that you are like opening up to them about. It doesn't mean that they actually feel that way about you. They could just be putting on a face to keep you calm so that they can have you continuously tell them information or so that they don't think that you're going to react to them negatively. But to be honest, you do have to be careful when it comes to self disclosing, just talking about yourself and talking about personal things with people in general, unless it's somebody that you feel extremely close to and it's somebody that you have known for a reasonable amount of time. You know, a few weeks is not usually going to cut it. A few days is definitely not going to cut it. It's usually a few years or like half a year or something around that time, right? Usually. So, why did I say that? This coworker I knew a lot about. I knew a lot about this coworker more than I did the last coworker that I mentioned in the other video. But I did know a good bit of information about them both. I'm not really gonna like put their personal lives online. You know, I don't really care about any of that nonsense. I doubt anybody else really does either. The biggest thing about all this to take away is that these are both coworkers who are like 10 to 15 years older than me, and they both act like they're about 10 to 15 years younger than me. And it's more so when they get upset. So to me, it comes off as like a sense of entitlement because you're a grown woman, a woman who's much older than a woman who's much older than me. One of them has their own house, has their own kids. The other one doesn't have their own house or their own kids, but juggles 2 jobs and takes frequent trips outside of the state, possibly maybe even the U.S. You know what I mean? So like these are people who pretty much have their lives together and have at least some kind of hold on what it is that they want to do and what it is they plan to do, right? With life, like in general, right? Um, Meanwhile, you know, I'm still in school. This job is like my full time slash part time job. It's my only job. I technically could be working at a few other places, but I've done 2 jobs while in college as well as university before, and it really takes a lot out of you. And it's so much so that like I've almost literally died. But I'll put that in another video if I remember, or if anybody cares. It's whatever. Um, so this coworker would leave work early, right? Would leave work early all the time. And I'm not talking like an hour early, right? I'm talking 3 to 4 hours early, right? We're supposed to be working an 8 hour shift. They get about 3 hours in, maybe 4 hours in, and then they're gone. right? They don't work for the rest of the day, but they're getting paid for the entirety of that shift. Mind you, at the beginning, they would check just to see if it bothered you and ask you, if it was okay for them to do so. And regardless of what you say, they'd still kind of push that they leave early anyway and come up with a completely different excuse, which for the most part didn't really seem like an excuse, but there were some things that were fishy about it in time that I kind of noticed. But it was cool, right? I didn't really care so much about them leaving early because we were always talking and joking around and having a good time, just being close with each other. And I that kind of built their character up for me. So I kind of took it as a, well, since I know you're not just a complete jerk, I don't mind working by myself for this shift or working by myself for a portion of the shift so that you can go do whatever it is that you need to do with your life. You're fine, you're in my good graces. So, I mean, I don't see a point in uh, you just not being here or even you being here, right? Over time, however, we started working less and less together. And it was for a bunch of reasons, more so dealing with other coworkers. This was the other coworker I was going to bring up. It's a guy, grown man. He's probably 53. I want to say 48 to 53, right? He's definitely in his late 40s, early 50s. He's got like a huge pot belly, right? Like this guy's got to be about, I kid you not, like 500 pounds easy. And it pretty much hurts for him to stand. uh, I'm sure it hurts for him to walk, and his clothes rarely ever fit him. Which I wouldn't really notice if he actually wore his uniform because we have a uniform, we have a dress code, but he doesn't. So I usually see him in his civilian clothes, his day to day clothes, and his day to day clothes just don't fit him. With that being said, he seemed pretty cool. I started working at the job with him originally, and I didn't really have too many issues with him. Over time, I started having a lot of issues with him. He didn't take care of his hygiene, so he stunk a lot throughout the shift. He would go to sleep, which was fine. A lot of people slept on the clock, but he would like shake as if he were having night terrors, and it would shake the entire room that we were in, which would scare the life out of me. And if I was asleep and he shook us both out of his rest, right? Or he shook us both out of our rest, so it would really spook me. Occasionally with me, and he started doing it with a lot of new coworkers as well. He would ask how the women are, like in our lives, as if I don't know. I don't know why. He'd ask how the women are treating us. He'd ask like how sexually appealing or how attractive the women were in whatever um, city or school or something that we attended. There's just a lot of stuff that he would do that kind of just came off as um, alarming. And he, believe it or not, is actually the main reason that like 2 to 3 female workers quit within their first few weeks. But I digress. So I used to work with him a lot when I was like first starting the job, and he is a terrible teacher, but because of his terrible teaching ways, I guess it made him an amazing teacher. He basically teaches you how to work hitting the ground running by leaving you alone for your entire first, maybe second shift, and having you do everything by yourself, even if you have no idea what it is you're supposed to be doing. Because eventually, you're going to be alone long enough to where you're going to figure out what it is you're supposed to be doing. Mind you, the number one rule for the job, no matter what, is that 2 people are supposed to be in that room at all times. But he'd leave and came up with a system to where if he would go off to check inventory, even on days when we're not supposed to check inventory. If he'd go off to check inventory, then he didn't have to be in the room with the other coworker. So checking inventory, let me tell you, as a one person job, usually at most will take two, maybe 2.5 to 3 hours. Depends on the real work, but usually inventory is almost always light, right? So on foot, just kind of dilly dallying, it'll take you about 2 hours. On foot, really working, it'll probably be an hour and a half. On like in a cart or in a car on a bike, whatever other transportation you have, take you about an hour, maybe 30 minutes. It all depends on the person, how fast they move, and what it is they're doing, right? For this coworker, it would take about 20 minutes, right? Because they've done inventory so much so that they know exactly where everything is. Not only that, but they would use old forms of previous inventories for the more up to date inventories, which, as you would guess, is something that you shouldn't do and can definitely get you fired at any job ever. But he would do it, and he still does it. But my manager doesn't care. My manager finds it appealing. He finds it very funny, amusing. He finds it very funny that this coworker doesn't ever really do his job. That he's the reason a lot of the other coworkers have quit. Blah 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 blah. I mean, it is what it is. You can't really change that, right? This kind of gives you the idea of the setting of my workplace. Um, so yeah, all this stuff was going down, and this coworker ends up becoming a huge problem over time. Right, I stopped working with him not because like I requested time off away from him, but because my manager started putting me with other coworkers to handle different shifts, while that coworker worked with other coworkers so that they'd get an understanding of what it is that they needed to do. Because my scheduling was more open to do any and every shift, whereas other people could only do specific shifts. And that coworker worked a specific shift. So new workers coming in trying to work that specific shift would be put on shift with him, which God bless their soul because he was a really impossible person to work with. But I digress. While I was working with the second girl that I was mentioning, he ends up taking my place and he works with her. Now they work together while I do other shifts, and that's fine. It's no biggie, right? I don't care. But the guy, right, starts to lie. He starts telling other coworkers complete lies to turn us against each other. So he would tell that female coworker that I said she did this or I said she did that. So then she'd come back and ask me whenever we actually did work together. And I was like, I've never said that. I don't know where he would have gotten that from. She'd catch him on a lie because obviously she'd believe me more because even though she worked with him more, he basically treats everybody the same. He can be a little inappropriate. He can be a little sloppy. He can be a little bit of a mess, and a lot of people naturally just don't like him. Even like the manager pointed out within like my first few months of working there that he is an inappropriate coworker. But he's not getting fired. So um she and I talk, and she realizes that he's lying. So he comes up during one of our shifts because he thought he was supposed to work that night. He wasn't. He was trying to talk me into going home. I wasn't going to go home because I mean that's a shift, that's money, and I'd be losing money letting him work my shift, right? So he ends up doing the inventory for that shift while she and I work together. But she stops and she's telling him, hey, you shouldn't be lying on other people. You can't be doing this or that. And his response was to say that she shouldn't be doing what she was doing, which was leaving work X amount of hours early. Okay, so they have this back and forth. Whatever, time passes, everything's fine, right? Well, another coworker who's newer than me but older than me. All these coworkers are older than me, by the way. I'm like right now I'm 24, about to turn 25 in like a month's time, maybe less than a month's time. So far, I've told you about a 35-year-old coworker, another coworker who's around 35, a coworker who's around 40 to 50, and one of them acts like a complete toddler when she's faced with having to do something she doesn't want to do. The other one goes behind people's backs, lies, as well as doesn't take care of himself and treats people just wrong, right? And this third one, I haven't really mentioned anything negative about, but trust me, it's coming. So there's a fourth coworker. He is in his 60s to 80s. He is much older than a lot of the others. He started after me, so he's new to the job as far as, I'm concerned. I had to train him. He's a terrible worker. Well, he was a terrible worker starting out. Everybody is. But he was terrible in a sense of ignorant, Being old, he didn't want to be told what to do. It was like he didn't want to learn. Teaching him was just like extra work. And if you were to ask, he'd probably lie and say, I never taught him a thing, even though I spent several weeks having to train him. And it probably wouldn't have been as many weeks if he would have just listened the first portion of the few weeks when I was training him. But it's whatever, right? It happens. Time passes, and this coworker, he's like a churchgoer, church man, whatever the case may be. He comes late to work one day. He comes late to work. It's fine, whatever. The first girl that I was talking about, right? She shows up to work an hour late every shift. An hour late, sometimes 2 hours late, an hour and 30 minutes late, 30 minutes late, 10 minutes late. She is late every shift. It's rare that being honest, I think I've only seen her come to work on time maybe twice. And I've been there for like a year and a half. Right? So, yeah. And she has the gall to like insult me and call me out of my name and all this extra stuff when she can't even do her job. Right? But I digress. So, this older coworker that I'm talking about, the older guy, ends up coming into work late. He comes into work late, but I'm leaving early. I'm leaving early because we have another new coworker. She doesn't work there anymore. She's young. She's like 19. She's black. Every coworker I have is black, right? I've had some of other races, but they did not stay long. But this young 19-year-old girl was like rarely ever working, right? Eventually, she really did buckle down and start working, but for a long time, she just did not want to do work. She'd push it off on other people. She wouldn't actually do the work she was supposed to do. She would leave early. There's supposed to be two people in a room at all times. She would go off into like her car and sit in her car for the majority of her shift. It was a mess, right? But this is just what we had to deal with. She also like never showed up in uniform. She was always half naked, which a lot of people didn't complain about because, I mean, we were just staring at this half naked, barely legal girl for 8 hours of our shift, and nobody had like the balls to say anything. And the way that our shifts were set up, that it was only two people working at a time, unless you were training somebody. So it was usually just one male worker and her alone in a room together for 8 hours. So naturally, you can imagine they're not going to complain about much when they're looking at her skin the entirety of 8 hours, probably even taking pictures and definitely texting other coworkers about her. But that's what was going on. And so one of the shifts, I let her go. I didn't tell her she could go or anything. She built up a habit where she would leave an hour early. A lot of the male coworkers just let her do it because who knows, right? That's just how guys treat women, I guess. But she left with me, and she actually left like 2 hours early. So I've got class the next day. Once again, during this time, I'm using a borrowed car because my car's out of function. I'm not trying. By this time, I'm getting off late. Like I'm getting off of work late. A lot of times, I get off of work late, and there have been times where driving in the dark has gotten me into more accidents than I'd like to admit. And the last thing I want to do is get into an accident in somebody else's car. With my job, the later you stay, the more you work, the more tired you can be. And I have driven home half asleep several times before in the past, right? So I'm using somebody else's vehicle. I have class the next day. I have a whole list of classes the next day. And it's just late, right? It's way past the time I'm supposed to go, right? Probably like 10, pushing to 15 minutes past the time I'm supposed to go. Somebody should have already been here, and I let this other girl leave 2 hours early. So I go and I check the clock. Well, not the clock, but the schedule. The schedule is the girl who had an issue with me, the 30-something-year-old, who shows up an hour later. I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to stay here an hour waiting on her. And I was checking to see who else was supposed to be on shift. Supposed to be this older guy. The one I was saying is like a church goer, is definitely in his 60s or older. He was supposed to be at work, but he wasn't there. And the thing is, what was really weird is he's pretty much always on time. He's actually early. He steals time. He that's his issue. He steals hours. He's supposed to be gone early, but instead he doesn't leave early. So he clocks out an hour later, even though he was off for an entire hour. He steals time, and he does it a lot. He does it pretty much every shift. Right? He steals people's shifts. He tries to talk people into going home. My manager has abused him by making him work doubles and telling him that he basically had to because this guy has no say. Well, he has say, but because he's older, he's a little more vulnerable. He works them anyway. There have been times where I've let him go home early so that he can actually get rest because he's complained about not being able to sleep and having a bad back and all this extra stuff. And I'm like, yo, go home, get rest. I got the shift covered. He, I, and maybe three other male workers were the main actual workers holding the company together, right? We do all the hours. We work shifts entirely by ourselves. There's a guy who comes around to check to see who's all actually working on the clock, and he comes at the worst times, right? Because whenever he comes is when like most of the guys are there. Whenever it comes to like a female worker being there, they're pretty much never on the clock. They're never in a shed. The room, the little enclosed space, I call it a shed because it's so small, but I feel like a room is a little more tolerable to understand. um, they're pretty much never working. And there's another guy who's never working, the big guy that I was referencing to earlier, like the 50-something-year-old, all right? So there's really like four guys that work, and I'm one of them. So by this point, like I said, I'm using somebody else's car. It's late at night. I'm tired. I'm ready to go. It's past the time that I was supposed to go. Um, I've got class in the morning. The longer I'm at work, the less sleep I get for class in the morning. If I oversleep for class because of work, I'm going to have an issue, right? I'm going to have a real big issue. I'm going to start leaving an hour early. So I text my manager. I'm like, hey, do you know where so-and-so is? Like the guy, the older guy. Because I knew that the young girl wasn't, the young girl, she's like 30 something. I knew that she wasn't going to be at work for like another hour or two. And my manager knew that too, but he doesn't care. He keeps her on shift anyway. And so he tells me he doesn't know where the guy is exactly and that he'd reach out to him. So he goes to reach out to him and he says, oh, yeah, I believe he's somewhere along the way, about 5 minutes away. I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to start heading out because, I got class, I got all this stuff going on. He's like, yeah, sure, I get it. He's like, I was kind of hoping you wouldn't leave, as early. Mind you, I'm leaving past the time that I'm supposed to clock out. Not only that, but I've been working by myself the entire time, which, by the way, earlier that day, one of the clients ended up showing up and nobody was there because the 19-year-old that I was supposed to be working with fell asleep in her car and left that guy to wander around the property for like God knows how long. I think he told me 20 to 30 minutes, but I was gone. I was gone because I went to get food. I went to get food because I was like, well, hey, I'm hungry. If she's here, at the very least, she can do some work when somebody shows up. Because earlier that day, that's what she had did. She hopped out of her car. She came over and like helped out with the work. So I was like, she'll probably just do the same. I'm gonna go get some food. Let it be that. And she didn't because she fell asleep in her car. She actually slept through him coming around on the property, which is crazy. But I let my manager know the situation, and he's just like, all right, drive safe, get home safe, whatever. I was like, cool. The guy, the old guy who was supposed to be filling in for me, was passing me on the street. And by the way, this happens a lot between my coworkers and I. Somebody or everybody ends up leaving when there's nobody there. And that's because they know that somebody else is right down the street. You can pass them. You see them passing you, and they go in. And it's happened before, tons of other workers, so I didn't think anything of it. And I get home, I go to school, and I have to go to work like the next day. All right, cool. Well, now I'm working with that guy the next day, the older church guy. And this guy, by the way, the young girl, again, I ended up letting her go early. I ended up having to do a double. I let her go early. Church guy is coming in. I'm supposed to be working with him. But no, 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 no. I'm working with a young girl again. The church guy comes in, but he comes in early because the young girl is leaving, right? He decides to come in early because she's leaving. He does that from time to time. They have some weird system. I don't know. But he ends up coming in, and usually he's like super happy, super cheerful, talking to me, asking me questions and whatnot. This time he comes in, and I realize he doesn't say anything to me. So I'm like, hey, what's up? And he just ignores me. And then he walks back out. Then he walks back in, and I'm like, oh, well, maybe he didn't hear me. So I ask him again. He ignores me. And then he walks back out. I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe he didn't hear me. So I ask him again. This is when things get interesting. And I'm going to put this in another video because this one's pushing on a 30-minute mark. And because the last one was 30 minutes, I'll just try to keep it within that 30-minute range, I guess.